It is still funny because of the timing, and a frequent visitor along with Jim Fowler is Johnny Carson. Represented late-night television for decades. He was a man who made America laugh every night with his charm, wit, and perfect timing. But behind the scenes, things weren't always so smooth. There were moments that shocked even his producers. Awkward interviews, backstage feuds, jokes that went too far, and episodes that were quietly buried. These are the 14 most surprising and uncomfortable moments from The Tonight Show that producers hoped we would forget. Johnny's early life and career. On October 23, 1925, John William Carson was born in Corning, Iowa. He developed into the unchallenged king of late night. His mother, Ruth Elizabeth Carson, was a homemaker, and his father, Homer Lloyd Kit Carson, was a manager of a power company. The family relocated multiple times before settling the town that would influence Johnny's early years, Norfolk, Nebraska, when he was 8 years old. Carson became enthralled with performances after discovering a book about magic when he was 12 years old. Soon after, he purchased a magician's kit and started doing tricks as the Great Carson. His first paid performance was at the Norfolk Rotary Club when he was 14 years old. He then went on to amuse at church socials and his mother's bridge club. During World War II, Carson enlisted in the U.S. He served as a midshipman in the V-12 program at Columbia University and Millsaps College. While he was not a combatant, he entertained troops on the USS Pennsylvania with a ventriloquist dummy called Eddie, a precursor to his lasting ability to engage people. After the war, Carson re-enrolled at Norfolk and attended the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. Carson graduated with a major in speech and drama, a minor in radio, and graduated in 1949. His senior thesis was how to write comedy jokes, which was written in the form of tape skits and analysis, showing his first true grasp of comedic structure. Carson began his on-air career with WOW Radio in Omaha, presenting a morning show complete with light-hearted repartee. Carson moved to Los Angeles in 1951 and was an announcer for KNXT reading station IDs and weather reports. Though low-key, it paid off with having his own show, Carson Cellar, with characters and sketches that would be reprised later on, The Tonight Show. His early big break came when he stepped in as a replacement for comedian Red Skelton, impressing network executives and earning his own short variety program, The Johnny Carson Show. He subsequently hosted the game program, Who Do You Trust?, whose quick wit and banter with his guests earned him surprising popularity nationwide. Carson took over as host of The Tonight Show from Jackper in 1962 and worked for 30 years. Carson's fast-paced patter, exact timing, and ability to bring the best out of guests transformed late-night television. Carson created such enduring personas as Karnak, the Magnificent, and Aunt Blabby, and his monologues were a nightly ritual for millions. Carson was a formidable presence. Carson received 6 Emmy Awards, a Peabody Award, and was inducted into the Television Academy Hall of Fame in 1987. Carson received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1992 and a Kennedy Center honor in 1932. Carson remained a figure of great respect even after retiring in 1992, and his successors David Letterman and Conan O'Brien spoke of him as the benchmark by which they measured themselves. Johnny Carson passed away on January 23, 2005 at 79 years old, leaving behind a legacy that affected American television and comedy for generations. Carson remained a figure of great respect even after retiring in 1992, and his successors David Letterman and Conan O'Brien spoke of him as the benchmark by which they measured themselves. Johnny Carson passed away on January 23, 2005 at 79 years old, leaving behind a legacy that affected American television and comedy for generations. Johnny's personal life. Carson's charm lit up the living rooms of millions, but his life was far more complicated than what his camera appearance would say. Carson had 4 different wives throughout his career, each marriage having its own ups and downs, marking his rise, reign, and his fall from fame. His first marriage was to Joan Jody Merrill Walcott, whom he met at the University of Nebraska. They were married in 1949 and had 3 children, Christopher, Corey, and Richard. But success proved swift and savage. As Carson's star began to rise, their marriage collapsed. Theirs was a boozy row and cold silence's marriage. Biographers have said they divorced in 1963, the year that Carson assumed his legendary role on The Tonight Show. Their son, Richard, was fatally injured in an automobile crash in 1991, a tragedy Carson didn't speak much about, but took quite the toll on him, according to reports. His second wife, Joanne Copeland, was a former model and TV host. They got married in 1963, and she helped convince him to work harder at being the host of The Tonight Show. But the spotlight was too bright to endure. The marriage only lasted until 1972, when Joanne later described Carson as emotionally remote, a description also echoed by those around him. Later the same year, Carson married Joanna Holland, who was also a model. They lived in New York with her son, but The Tonight Show's move to California strained their marriage. His extensive working hours and perfectionism didn't leave him enough time for home life. They divorced in 1985, and Joanna passed away in 2025. His fourth and final marriage was to Alexis Moss in 1987. Unlike his previous relationships, theirs was a more subdued, quiet affair. Carson retired in 1992 and spent his later life sailing, reading, and living quietly with Alexis in Malibu. Producer George Schlatter has stated, "The real love of Johnny's life was Alex." Despite the fame he possessed, Carson was notoriously guarded. His longtime lawyer and confidant, Henry Bushkin, described him as gracious, funny, and generous one moment, and curt, aloof, and hard-hearted the next. Carson himself once quipped, "If I had given as much to marriage as I gave to The Tonight Show, I'd probably have a hell of a marriage." This line captured both his self-awareness and regret. Behind all that laughter was a man who struggled to connect, who gave everything to his craft, but kept his heart behind the curtain. His relationships were marked by brilliance, tension, and ultimately a silent search for peace. Even with his marriages, Carson kept people at arm's length. He may have been charming in public, but home was where he was emotionally distant and had regular bursts of anger. According to his friends, he was a man who could be surrounded by people and yet be completely alone. And although Carson avoided politics on television behind the camera, his views were sharp and uncensored. He once informed critics that those objecting to his jokes in the home were probably saying something worse there, a hint that he saw behind the pose of virtue with which the public presented itself. Johnny Carson was a contradiction more than an actor. He brought the world laughter, but kept himself within his bubble, staying reserved. The man behind the desk was a genius, but complicated. This is what added to his story being unforgettable. 14 most shocking moments. Johnny Carson may be the king of late-night TV, but even his domain had those moments so forbidden that producers struggled to keep them under wraps. They weren't bloopers. They were raw and utterly uncomfortable. What follows are 14 moments that rocked the studio and nearly went undigested by the public. 1. The band episode. There is one Tonight Show episode so deeply buried that it's become late-night lore. Star Crate says that this mysterious show was on once and then vanished. No reruns, no transcripts, no official listing, and no surviving footage. NBC never officially recognized it existed, which has only added to generations of speculation among media historians. Rumors spread about what went down. Some say a disastrous guest appearance, possibly a celebrity meltdown or a racist tirade, forced the producers to cancel the show. Others reported behind-the-scenes collapse bled over into the live program, leaving visibly shaken Carson in a state from which he could not recover. Familiar with his composure, Carson was reported so out of sorts that NBC high-ups scrambled to cancel the episode in its entirety, fearful of reputational harm to the network. What's so horrifying about this time is the utter silence that followed. While other embarrassing or incendiary moments were either cut or shelved discreetly, this show was erased from memory. All the cover-up efforts served only to make it more mysterious, making it a lost footnote of television history. Fans have been curious for years about what happened that night, but no inside source has ever revealed any concrete facts. The lost Johnny Carson episode NBC tried to bury. Why is a clip that delves into this haunting mystery, compiling theories and archival clues that indicate a moment so volatile even Carson's legendary cool couldn't prevent it from collapsing. Scandal, sabotage, or something even more personal. Whatever it was, the truth remains unknown, rendering one of the creepiest and most unsolved chapters of late-night history. 2. The Joan Rivers fallout. Joan Rivers and Johnny Carson weren't just colleagues, They were a late-night power duo. Carson had championed Rivers early in her career, famously telling her on air in 1965, "You're going to be a star." Over the years, she became a regular guest and eventually his permanent guest host, filling in whenever he was away. But in 1986, everything changed. Rivers accepted a historic offer from the upstart Fox network to host her own late-night show, becoming the first woman to do so, but she didn't tell Carson until the deal was all but signed. Rivers later stated that she feared the deal would fall through and did not want to jeopardize her status on The Tonight Show prematurely. But when the news broke publicly before she'd had an opportunity to discuss it with Carson, she called him and he hung up on her. They never spoke again. Not only did Carson cut all contact, but he banned her from The Tonight Show for life. Even when she would run into him in public, he would not talk to her. Producers were stunned at how intense his backlash was, and the feud was one of the most infamous silent breakups in television history. Rivers did not again appear on The Tonight Show until 2014, nearly 50 years after her debut and long after Carson's death. Third, Wayne Newton's fight. Wayne Newton's grudge against Johnny Carson was more than an ego war. It was a combat that nearly turned into punches. Carson, during the 1970s, began to nightly poke fun at Newton's masculinity, with Newton emerging apparently effeminate or gay. Newton at first attempted to roll with it, but the jokes never stopped. They were repeated each evening and eventually taken up by other comedians. After a year and a half of trying to reach Carson privately, Newton finally marched into NBC's Burbank offices, found Carson in a meeting with producer Fred Cordova, and asked for a moment alone. What happened next became late-night legend. Newton told Carson, "Cut out all these jokes on me, and they'll cut right out or I'll kick your ass." Carson, known for his icy personality, did not apologize and never had Newton on again. Years later, Newton called Carson a mean-spirited human being and called the gags deliberate cruelty that damaged his reputation. He even blamed Carson's clout for the spread of vicious rumors about mob ties, which led to a legal lawsuit against NBC. The backlash was so intense that Newton's appearances on The Tonight Show mysteriously disappeared, and the two never reconciled. 4. Charles Grodin's On-Air Challenge. On September 5, 1990, Saddest, and actor Charles Grodin appeared on The Tonight Show and delivered what became the most cringe-inducing interview in late-night history. Grodin's deadpan, dry wit made talk show appearances more akin to performance art and drew a fine line between hostility and humor. But this time, he crossed a line. Halfway through the segment, Grodin challenged Carson with a question. "Do you even care about your guests?" It wasn't asked with a wink or a leer. It was asked like a challenge. Carson, stunned, delivered a cold staccato reply that left the studio in stunned silence. There was electricity in the air. Grodin didn't blink. He continued to push at Carson's glossy surface and the show's mundane tempo. What started as a strange little thing quickly escalated into an actual ego conflict. Members of the audience didn't know whether to laugh or breathe. Carson, who earned a living diffusing embarrassment with charm, looked visibly upset. Splice Today reports that producers even considered cutting the segment from future reruns because they worried it destroyed The Tonight Show's carefully built veneer, but Carson allowed it on the air in its entirety. Even now, fans return to view the clip as an odd moment when the king of late night was caught off guard on his own turf, not by scandal, but by a surprising visitor who had the audacity to challenge the very existence of the show. It's part act, part reality, and all discomfort. 5. Shelley Winters versus Oliver Reed. Shelley Winters made late-night history on The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson. In 1975, British actor Oliver Reed began making sexist and salacious remarks, including comments about the roles and appearance of women. Winters, famous for having a quick wit and no tolerance for misogyny, did not hesitate. About halfway through the bit, she got up, grabbed her drink, and threw it straight into Reed's face. The audience gasped. Carson, usually the voice of reason, seemed visibly perturbed as tension inside the studio reached astronomical heights. The moment was so intense that the producers later cut the segment from repeat transmissions, excising the most controversial parts in a bid to keep the show's shiny reputation intact. But the original transmission remained intact, and clips have made the scene online. transforming the incident into a mythical airing of live television beat 'em. Winter's on-air defiance was not a spontaneous reaction. It was a reckoning. 6 Animal Mayhem. Joan Embersey's animal appearances on a weekly basis were never a guarantee. But on one night of The Tonight Show, filmed in the 1970s, they became sheer chaos. Embry presented a monkey that seized at a guest's hand suddenly. Not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to surprise the studio into nervous laughter. A snake, she presented, slithered out of the hand of its handler and began moving freely across the stage. Soon after, Johnny Carson, famously ill at ease with bizarre animals, could be seen visibly shaking and backing away, clearly traumatized. The audience gasped, and the crew scrambled to contain it. Carson tried to calm himself down, but his discomfort was obvious. Producers eventually excised the segment in subsequent reruns, omitting the most frenzied seconds to preserve the gloss of the show. While Joe and Embersey's visits were always a hit for their informality and playfulness, this show was one of the few times Animal Mayhem really went out over the set and allowed the audience a glimpse of Carson's very real fear. 7. The Zsa Zsa Gabor cat joke. It's one of the Tonight Show's greatest all-time stories, but it probably never happened. Years of pop culture rumor have it that Zsa Zsa Gabor once had a cat in hand on The Tonight Show and asked Johnny Carson, "Would you like to pet my pussy?" Carson supposedly replied, "Sure, just move the damn cat." The joke has been retold multiple times in the realm of comedy, late-night legend, and online forums. But here's the thing. No authenticated video, no transcript, and no official broadcast that this exchange ever took place. Actually, most researchers and fans nowadays believe it's an urban legend and maybe an example of the Mandela effect, where people remember something clearly that never even occurred. Some variations of the event even give the moment to Raquel Welch or Jane Fonda. Carson's reputation as a cheeky double-entendre comedian likely fueled the myth, but after archived debates and hindsight interviews, the incident was never broadcast. It's a joke that lives in memory, not in tape. 8. Carson forgets his monologue. On December 14th, 1988, Carson entered The Tonight Show ready to deliver his usual monologue. But first, something went wrong. A beeper went off in the audience, throwing him off his timing. Then producer Freddie DeCordova came in from offstage, trying to fix the timing. The double disruption put Carson completely off sync. He tried to start his joke once more, but couldn't remember what he was doing. Instead of struggling on, Carson burst out laughing. He stuttered, tried again, and gave up, laughing so hard he could barely get the words out. The audience burst out laughing as well, and even Ed McMahon couldn't help but laugh along. What was special about it wasn't the mistake. It was Carson's reaction to it. He didn't try to brush the blooper aside or pretend it hadn't happened. He went with it, turning the moment into a recurring joke for the rest of the segment. His real reaction showed a side of himself. His fans loved genuine, relaxed, and very human. Producers reportedly talked about editing out the segment from reruns in the future, fearing it looked too unpolished. Carson would not agree to cutting it, though. Today, the clip is a fan favorite, and this is proof that even the most seasoned actors can have off nights, and sometimes those are the nights of their lives. 9. Don Rickles roasts Carson. Don Rickles didn't appear on The Tonight Show as much as he commandeered it with insult comedy, so sharp it left Carson speechless. In one of their most famous exchanges, Rickles embarked on a rapid-fire roast of Carson, joking about everything from his wealth to his reserved nature. Carson, usually in command, could only sit back and laugh as Rickles tore through the set like a demolition ball of humor. The audience loved it, and Carson, despite being the target, loved it, too. Their chemistry was explosive. Rickles would tease Carson's marriages, his clothing, even his sidekick, Ed McMahon, as Carson tried to keep a straight face. A classic exchange came when Carson discovered Rickles had broken his cigarette box the night before while guesting with Bob Newhart. Carson burst onto the adjacent set during the live show, mic in hand, and excoriated Rickles in person, turning the roast into a two-way affair. It was live, crazy, and unforgettable. 10. Eva Gabor Twister segment. Johnny Carson turned an odd new board game into a nationwide craze in 1966, but the experience gave NBC producers the jitters. In a live episode of The Tonight Show, Carson had actress Eva Gabor play Twister, a new game then languishing on store shelves. What started as friendly hype quickly escalated into one of the most flirtatious exchanges in Tonight Show history. Carson turned the wheel of fortune. Gabor arched into position, and before long, he was crawling across her on all fours. Her dress already low-cut fell still lower, and the audience burst with laughter and gasps. NBC producers seemed to have been left in the dark over just how intriguing the moment turned out to be. While the segment aired in its entirety during its first run, reruns later were cut down to eliminate the body contact and avoid complaints. But the damage was done. Twister sales overnight surged, and Carson's titillating chemistry with Gabor became a pop culture water cooler hit. It was a moment that saved Twister and almost shocked late-night TV. 11. Tiny Tim's Wedding. On December 17, 1969, The Tonight Show converted from late-night comedy to TV spectacle, and it was so massive that it rivaled the moon landing as a ratings draw. That night, novelty singer Tiny Tim, known for his falsetto and ukulele ballads, married 17-year-old Miss Vicky Binger on the show. The set had 10,000 tulips imported from Holland, a 6-note ceremony, and Carson played completely straight-faced as the newlywed couple celebrated their union before an aghast studio audience. The episode drew 45 million viewers, the largest viewing number to date for an episode of The Tonight Show at that time, second only to Carson's farewell years later. For perspective, it was greater than double the number of American viewers who saw Prince William marry Kate Middleton. But within NBC, producers were nervous. The teepee-like staging, plus Tiny Tim's offbeat personality and the dreamlike nature of the segment set others anxious that it would sully the show's integrity. Carson, being a professional, didn't show any concern, but staff members confided among themselves they'd cross a line. The couple divorced 8 years later after Tulip, their daughter, was born. Looking back on the experience, Miss Vicky said, "I was just a kid, thinking, this will be fun." And it was. 12. Peter Popoff Scandal. In 1986, The Tonight Show took an unusual departure from comedy to investigative expose. Johnny Carson himself, having been a magician, invited skeptic James the Amazing Randi to expose televangelist Peter Popoff, who claimed to get messages from God during his faith-healing crusades. Popoff would call out names, ailments, and personal details about members of the audience, claiming it was God speaking through him. But Randi had found the secret. Popoff was employing an earpiece hidden within his clothing, receiving real-time information from his wife backstage, who had obtained it from prayer cards filled out by attendees. On the air, Randi replayed tapes of Popoff's wife spooning him lines like, "She's got cancer of the uterus," and Pop-offing back the same words verbatim moments later. The studio fell silent. Carson, visibly shaken, let the evidence speak for itself. The bit didn't just embarrass Popoff. It sent shock waves through the televangelist community. NBC producers seemed to worry about outrage reaction from religious viewers, but Carson stood firm. It was one of the most powerful truth bombs ever detonated on late-night TV. 13. Raquel Welch walks off mid-inter. In one of the most cringe and dramatic Tonight Show moments ever, actress Raquel Welch stormed off the stage in the middle of an interview after an angry exchange with Johnny Carson. Welch, the embodiment of glamour and a hard-nosed personality to boot, was on a publicized adventure when Carson subjected her to a series of sarcastic remarks that she took as condescending and belittling. The tension mounted quickly, and Welch, seemingly fed up beyond words, stood up and walked out on stage before the bit was over. The audience was stunned. Carson, usually the master comebacks, was shaken visibly. NBC producers seemed troubled by what had happened and refused to run the segment again for fear that it would hurt the reputation of Carson and the public image of Welch. It became one of those rare Tonight Show moments that appeared only once and was then quietly buried. This was not a celeb meltdown, but an instant that served to show Carson's charm to be restricted and live television to be unscripted. Welch's walk-off is the most dramatic exit in late-night TV history, and NBC's attempt to censor it only added to its mystique. 14. Carson's veto power. Behind the late-night spontaneity, he protected his image jealously. Carson had the ability to veto repeats of certain programs, especially those featuring awkward interviews, bomb jokes, or personally humiliating moments, according to a veteran NBC videotape engineer. Producers indulged his judgment, even when it meant shelving entire broadcasts. But the real mystery runs deeper. In the early 1970s, hundreds of Tonight Show tapes from the 1960s were moved to Burbank and stored on temporary shelves. When a building manager tried to reclaim the space, he discreetly ordered that the tapes be taken to a dump and burned. Carson was furious when he learned of this, especially after he requested a 1968 clip that was now lost. He reportedly said, "If I had only known it was a matter of storage space, I would have gladly paid the $1,000 a month for a warehouse down the street." Even though the tapes weren't Carson's property and NBC owned them, he still exerted strict control over what was rerun. The complete inventory of episodes he vetoed from reruns is unknown, sealed in NBC's vault or gone forever. What exists is a clean version of Carson's legacy, polished, iconic, and edited with care to preserve the image he wished for the world to see. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. If you've got any thoughts or questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.